Hello, everyone. We are pleased to be joined by Dr. Chris Milburn today. Dr. Milburn is an emergency room and family physician from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and formerly the head of emergency medicine in the area's Eastern Zone, which we'll get into. So without further ado, welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on today.
Would you be able to tell our audience a little bit about yourself, your medical background and professional background leading up to about 2020?
Sure. I had a background in physics, and I did a master's in physics prior to going into medicine. So I have a stronger background in math and hard sciences than the average medical school entrant, who tend to come more from biology and what I would call the softer side of science. I've I trained as an emergency and family doctor. So we do in Canada, most people who work in Emerge, we do our 2 years of family medicine residency after our 4 years of med school, and then we do an extra year of Emerge. So that's my training. And and I graduated in 1999. I've been working since then. I had been the Emerge head, the chief of Emerge for the Eastern Zone in Nova Scotia for about 2.5 years before my untimely demise.
So you're right in the thick of things, I guess, in the emergency room. What was it like? Was it packed? Like, was it overwhelmed, the emergency room at the beginning of the pandemic or even into 2021? What was going on in the emergency room?
Well, I can't speak for other provinces, right? All I have is my local experience. But what I can tell you is it was very strange, right? Like there I was, head of Emerge, kind of going quietly along, trying to deal with the normal issues of overcrowding and lack of access to resources that every place in Canada has. And all of a sudden, boom, big pandemic. My job was officially 0.2, but it went all of a sudden to like a 1.5, and I was working frantically, getting 1 million memos a day, and I traveled to all the emerges around the zone to try to prepare them for how to deal with this, what we thought was going to be the bubonic plague. We did, and I think this is true of most provinces, we did everything we could to empty out the hospital. Any patient who could possibly go home, we talked to their family, can you take this old lady home? I know she's a bit weak. We got everybody into nursing homes that we could get into nursing homes. We cleared out the hospital. It was the most empty I've ever seen it in my 23 years in medicine. Everything shut down, right? And then it felt, the best description of it I heard was a friend of mine said, it feels like we're in the medieval castle and we have the boiling oil, we have all our arrows in the quiver, and we have all our weapons sharpened, and we're standing there looking, scanning the horizon from the ramparts, and there's no barbarians. They're not coming, and they're not coming, and they're not coming. That's what it felt like. We were ready to go, and nothing hit, and nothing hit, and nothing hit. And in Nova Scotia, to give you a sense, even at our maximum impact of COVID, we have about 3,500 plus medical beds in our province, and our maximum COVID impact, we only had about 100 of them filled with COVID patients. So that's 1 in 35 beds. So over the last year, especially, we're back to being incredibly crowded. We're playing catch up from COVID. I believe there's a lot of things that were neglected during COVID. People had chest pain, they didn't deal with it. People had that niggling pain and a little bit of weight loss, which was a cancer, and they didn't deal with it because they were too nervous to go to the hospital. Now we're quite overwhelmed again. But at no point in Nova Scotia could we ever blame our overwhelmedness on COVID. It just didn't happen here for us. So oddly, for most Emerge practitioners in Nova Scotia, and I can certainly say this too, a lot of us never even saw a COVID patient, because most of them weren't that sick. They might have come and got a test and they stayed at home and isolated, but we didn't really see them in ER just because we didn't have that density of COVID patients at any point. So that was, COVID wasn't our issue. Our issue was all of the outcomes of COVID policy.
Yeah, and there's serious repercussions that come with that because of all those people who, chose not to go to the hospital, and cancer's formed and it's a little too late for them, or it's been left too long, right? So you were removed from your position as head of emergency medicine for the Eastern Zone for having expressed your views publicly. Could you explain what sort of led to that and why that happened?
Sure. So, as well as as well as my background in hard sciences, which I think has given me a different view of the pandemic, I haven't been emotionally driven. I've tried to be data driven. It's just the way I roll. But I also have a great interest in sort of philosophy, political science, psychology, sort of that nidus where those Venn diagrams all overlap. My wife has a background in philosophy and poli-sci, and we read incessantly and talk incessantly about it. So I had not only the views on data around COVID and the science and how what that should be telling us, but I also had a certain view of the history of democracy, the history of liberty and free speech and things in the world that gave me that also drove my opinions. And so I've been a regular contributor to a show called The Issue Panel on CBC, our local CBC in Cape Breton. So every few months I would be invited on along with two other people, and we would do a half an hour in the morning, and they would throw out a few kind of things in the news, oh, here's the latest thing in the news. Canada just beat Russia in a tournament. What do you think about it? It could be anything, right? And we're just three people with opinions, and we bandy back and forth. They would usually tell us the issues about 24 hours in advance. And so in my usual style, I looked at my email like about midnight the night before, and I'm supposed to be on at 7:30, and it was issues around COVID. And I kind of thought, oh, I know I have a contrarian view of COVID, but I've never been one to shirk when given the opportunity to speak. So I went on and I said my piece. What it ended up focusing on, there were three things that people took issue with that I said. Number one, I said that kids should be in school, that COVID is not nearly dangerous enough for kids that we should damage them by keeping them out of school. And excuse me, that contradicted some of the policy of public health here. So I was speaking against public health by saying kids should be in school. I said as well that I was completely against mandated vaccines or vaccine passports, because this is a new vaccine, and by rights we've never mandated anything that's that new and untested, and it was just somehow wrong, deeply wrong to do that. And then the third thing, which perhaps was the most controversial because it does border into opinion rather than science, but I said that the chief medical officers of health had been granted too much power, and that we essentially had turned into a dictatorship with an unelected and unaccountable person at the head of that dictatorship, and that was really bad for democracy. It shouldn't be the way we run our society ever, pandemic or not. And that was taken as a kind of a swipe at the chief medical officer of health. So another reporter who wanted to stir up trouble had listened to me, and during the chief medical officer of health's regular media scrum, about 48 hours later, he asked, stuck a microphone in his face, said, what do you think of what Dr. Milburn said about you? And, he said, you're power hungry and blah, blah, blah. Mm. So it was about 48 hours after that I got the fateful call saying, you're no longer head of Emerge.
That quickly. Wow. It's
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Wow. So were you met with like an evidence-based response by Dr. Strang? I think that's the chief medical officer there. Did he respond back to your comments with evidence, or did he just sort of try to push your comments to the side?
No, not at all. So really interested and involved with public health for about 20 years now. I've been a member of a few local committees on public health, some fairly important community stuff, partly by my request, and sometimes by invitation. I was a member and then chief of the public health committee at the Canadian Medical Association. It was called the Committee on Health and Promotion, but it was essentially dealt with public health. So like I say, I was not only a member, but I was the head of it at one point. And also I've been a member for many years, and then the chief for several years of the Doctors Nova Scotia Public Health Committee. So provincially, nationally, and locally, I've been very involved with public health. I have a strong background in math and statistics. So I'm not like some kind of yokel who walked whatever off the street and just said, "Oh yeah, I got my opinions on COVID." It's like I've been reading all the data, and I read whatever Dr. Strang read, and then some, I think. So what I hoped would happen, and I actually reached out to him with an email when I heard that he got confronted at the scrum between when he was confronted at the scrum and when I got fired. I actually wrote him an email saying, "Look, I don't think you're a bad person, just so you know. My comments were misrepresented. I'd love to talk to you. I have some ideas that are different than you. I'm seeing things on the front lines that I think you maybe not aware of. So it'd be great to talk to you. And just FYI, I do have a background in public health, so my comments are not uninformed." And never heard from him. And what he replied at that press scrum was basically for me to stay in my lane. He said, Milburn should stick to emergency medicine and I'll take care of public health. That was his reply. And I thought that was so terrible, but very symptomatic of the problem with our approach to COVID. And that approach is we forget that everything's interconnected. You know, if Dr. Strang makes up a rule that nobody can go to the gym, well, I see people who are gaining weight, right? If Dr. Strang makes a rule that shuts down all the support programs for drug and alcohol rehab, well, guess what? I see more people who are addicted and dying of it. And so you would think that the chief public health officer would be really, really keen to hear from frontline and to get our opinions. What are you guys seeing? Wow, we've never done this before in the history of our society. We've never shut down society. This is really a big experiment. What are you guys seeing? We need to know to adjust our response. But instead it was just shut up, stick to emergency medicine, and I'll do public health. It was just extremely and deeply disappointing, I guess I call it.
Do you think there's anything incentivizing this, or why do you think they're taking that approach where they're not consulting other areas and not just health, but like say businesses and looking at the economic factors? It just seems to be very like one category is focusing on it. I don't know, it's very odd.
Yeah, well, there's this concept that comes from the business world, I believe. It's called asymmetric incentive. And so to give you a sense, I actually have sympathy for the chief medical officers of health. They're in a really tough spot, right? Because if you look at the media over the last couple of years, there was every attempt made to, so for instance, in Nova Scotia, we really have had super low numbers of deaths from COVID. We've had, I believe we're still around 150 deaths in a province that normally has 8,000 to 9,000 deaths per year, right? So it's 150 deaths over 2 years. So 17,000 people or so have died in our province, and 150 of them were from COVID. So it's a minimal impact. Most of those, or a good chunk of those deaths occurred in one big nursing home outbreak in Halifax. And immediately the media jumped all over that. Why was this allowed to happen? Why didn't we do things better? Why didn't the public health manage to quell this? And this is terrible, and this is awful, and whatnot. So on the one hand, they're getting raked over the coals. On the other hand, I'll sort of tell you a little personal story. One of my very good friends had a brother who had serious alcohol problems through a good chunk of his life. But he was one of these guys who, when he was working, he let's say, crass way of putting it, he kept his shit together for work. And when COVID hit, work shut down. And so he started to drink more, to the point where it was getting really scary. They were afraid they were going to find him dead. He lived alone in an apartment. He was isolated. He was drinking all the time. And they tried to get him help. It was to the point where they found him comatose and brought him to the emerge. And what they would do is, give him some IV fluid and keep him for 12 hours and then discharge him home. And there were no programs available because all the programs, the help programs were shut down. And they did eventually find him dead. It was, maybe a few weeks after his discharge from the emergency room. So he was dead on his couch, Dr. Strang is not being questioned about that. Nobody is saying, look, your policies killed this man in all likelihood. There's nobody in the media who's going to take that story and run with it and say, look at this. So on the one hand, just back to my overall point with this, on the one hand, he's getting raked over the coal. We're having a public inquiry into the deaths in the nursing home. On the other hand, this 47-year-old gentleman with a long life had died of alcoholism, which was exacerbated by the whole COVID response, right? So it's this asymmetric incentive that I believe has pushed medical officers of health into making policies that are overall, in my view, overall clearly more harm than help. I think that's very clear at this point.
It's detrimental, really.
Has there ever been like a COVID task force put together in Nova Scotia, or was it essentially Dr. Strang just making these rules and then telling the people of Nova Scotia how things are going to go?
Well, it's funny. I'm smiling because in theory, there's a committee, right? But the committee meets behind closed doors. It's all private. And then all we get is the dictum, right? So for instance, oh gosh, I can't remember exactly when, but well into the pandemic, all of us in the hospital got this dictum saying, thou shalt wear plastic face shields at all times, everywhere in the hospital, right? I don't want to go too much into the science behind that, but it's it would be like giving a firefighter a plastic face shield to walk into a fire to protect them from the smoke, right? Because COVID is aerosolized. Smoke is an aerosol. So why would you expect a plastic face shield to help you with any aerosol, right? So I thought this was very strange. And I asked for the evidence behind that. And the response I got after trying to push the email up the chain a bit was, you'll do it because the committee decided it, right? So it's to me, it's sort of like, it feels like a game of Simon Says, or in the case of Nova Scotia, Strang Says, thou shalt wear a face shield, thou shalt wear a mask, thou shalt not go to the gym, thou shalt not walk at the park because we shut that down, but you can walk on the sidewalks, I think when this first hit, and we were all in this together, I think we really did believe that. I believe that. I thought, wow, this is going to be great. This is going to bring us together and whatnot. But that was when I really felt for the first month or two that we were getting all of the data. We were getting things explained to us. We weren't being told, you'll do this because I told you so. We were actually being told why. And then we got into this realm where, Quebec had curfews because COVID comes out after 9 p.m. and kills people after 9, but not before that. And, if you're at a restaurant, if you're sitting, you can have your mask off, but if you stand up, suddenly you have to have it on, or the waitress comes over and yells at you, And we all knew it was stupid. And that's when people started to, I think, really go off the rails with the response. And more of us said, hey, wait a minute, this is not following the science. This is somebody making stupid rules in a back room and not explaining them to anyone. And, the primary problem to me with the public health response, when you dig right down to it, is public health's role has never been to run your life and micromanage your life. That wasn't the mandate of public health. They were supposed to advise us on risks and let us respond like intelligent adults. So, for instance, flying in a bat suit, like jumping off a cliff and flying in a bat suit, is very dangerous. But public health has never said, you're not allowed to fly in bat suits because it's dangerous, right? They've never said the hospitals are full, and if you're flying in bat suits, you're going to overwhelm them. That wasn't really their job, right? Or racing motorcycles, whatever. Like, certain things carry a real inherent danger, but people choose to do them because they think those are worthwhile. And suddenly public health felt its role was to micromanage us, to the point where it's like, you can't go over and visit your sick grandmother because we've said it's too dangerous. Well, what about what I think? Maybe you could just tell me the numbers and explain to me why you think that. And then I could decide as a grown adult, well, listen, my risk of bringing COVID over to her right now is probably only 1 in 10,000. I think that's low enough that I think she needs a visit, right? Yeah. But instead we were treated like children. And part of treating us like children was not explaining why.
So maybe to back it up a little bit, talking about the COVID and the COVID deaths and whatnot, can we say these COVID deaths are being overemphasized? And so what would be the reason to do so, to overemphasize, if that's the case?
Yeah. Have you guys may be familiar with Hanlon's razor? It's never attribute to conspiracy what can adequately be explained by stupidity. And I don't know with this one. I think much of it is stupidity. Just we have a media that's insanely focused on COVID and emphasizes every death. Um, but I think it borders into malfeasance because, well, I don't know if you've read out of Britain, but there's a few people, kind of insiders with public health, who kind of broken the silence, and they've talked about how part of public health's part of public health's push from the beginning of the COVID response was, and you know, these people who met in small rooms and in these private meetings said, we need to get the public scared enough so that they'll follow our mandates, right? So they were purposely trying to make us afraid. Um, and I believe what happened, and some of these people have said, is that oops, we overdid it, right? Like we made people too afraid. People completely lost perspective on how dangerous COVID actually is, right? If you were under 50 in Canada in the last couple of years, you were 5 times or more likely to die in a car accident than die of COVID. And the people who died of COVID were almost all unwell people. So it wasn't like, as a healthy person under 50, your odds of dying in a car accident were probably 50 or 100 times higher than dying of COVID, right? But if you had have asked anybody on the street, you pull somebody off the street and you ask them, what's your risk of dying of COVID? They would greatly overestimate it. There were some really interesting man on the street surveys done about that. Britain, Denmark, US all had these surveys that basically showed that people overestimated the risks of COVID typically by somewhere from 10 to 100 times. So if COVID was 100 times as dangerous as it is, then maybe an extreme response is more justified. From my political philosophical point, I still don't agree with it, but you could have a better scientific argument for it. But the problem we ran into was, like I say, I think governance and public health and media all colluded to produce this COVID narrative that COVID was this horrible killer, and even if you were 25 and healthy, oh my God, you could die of this, and you know, if you dare go around your parents, you're going to kill them, and they're dead for sure. So just stay in your basement and don't ask questions, right? And most of us did because we're good people and we want to protect others.
So following up with that, how does a physician write a death certificate? So how does that process sort of go?
I'll take a moment and I'll plug my Substack. It's my wife and I. My wife's a doc as well. She's a psychiatrist. So we are the Pairodocs, Pairodocs, Pairodocs.substack.com. And I actually wrote a piece exactly on that issue, because the answers is actually a lot more difficult than people think. People think easy peasy, somebody dies, you just write down what they died of. But one of the things that we all go through as medical trainees is the first few times we fill out a death certificate, it's actually really difficult because, well, it's interesting. An older physician who taught me said when he was teaching me about those, not teaching me, I was just answering a few questions, not like we had formal teaching on it, but he said, literally you could write cardiac arrest on every death certificate, because that's what happens. That's kind of the definition of death. What this person died of? Well, their heart stopped, right? And whether they got their arm cut off and bled to death in a car accident, or whether they had a heart attack, or whether they had dementia, they got dehydrated and then eventually just petered out, they all died of cardiac arrest, right? So it does get difficult when you got somebody with multiple medical problems. You know, just I'll give you a little example. I work in a nursing home pretty regularly, and so the people die all the time there. The average length of life in a nursing home is only a couple of years. So every year, you know, up to half of your patients will die. So you're filling out death certificates regularly. I had a lady who, she had pretty bad diabetes. She had a bad heart with narrowing arteries, and she had a prone to a heart arrhythmia, and she had kidney failure, and she had dementia, right? So that's your basics. And she had some other things, but those are the basics. what happened with her was when COVID hit, she was used to being visited, and when she stopped getting visited, she started to get depressed. It's a little hard to tell when somebody has significant dementia, but the nurses who knew her well felt she was getting depressed and stopped eating as much, stopped drinking as much, got more dehydrated, which exacerbated her kidney failure. And then as her kidney failure got worse, her sugars got out of control. And then she finally got so dehydrated that it put a bunch of stress on her heart. And then she went into a funny heart rhythm, and she got really quite uncomfortable. So we brought her over to the hospital, and her family didn't want any extreme treatment. So she ended up dying. So what do I write on that death certificate? I don't know. She kind of died of, it was her dementia partly, it was depression partly, it was kidney failure partly, it was her heart, it was her diabetes, everything, right? So you kind of got to just pick one and go with it. Now you throw into the mix, let's say 3 days before she died, she had developed sniffles and tested positive for COVID. Well, did she die of COVID? Well, kind of not, but that was how we did things statistically. And in many countries, COVID deaths were any death that occurred within 28 days of a positive COVID death was a COVID death, right? That is extremely problematic, because let's twist that around and look at vaccines, right? Most of Canada got 2 vaccines in 2021. Imagine if we defined a vaccine-related death in the same way. That means there's 2 28-day periods, essentially 2 months in 2021, where each person was within 28 days of a vaccine. So that means even if you just randomly died in 2021, there's about a 1 in 6 chance, 2 in 12 months, that would have been defined as a vaccine-related death. And then we would have had this huge amount of vaccine-related deaths, which would have been a big scandal, right? But we didn't define it that way. Matter of fact, we kind of went to the opposite extreme with vaccine deaths. It had to be like firmly established. It couldn't just be like, oh, this person had blood clots in their lung and died 6 days after their second vaccine. Oh, well, that's probably coincidence, right? So it was this complete double standard. COVID deaths, everything was a COVID death if you had COVID. Vaccine-related deaths, didn't matter if you're being vaccinated. It's just coincidence. So it was no wonder we got these extreme numbers out there.
Yeah, that really manipulates the data, and maybe not intentionally, but that only adds to that fear too, the fear mongering. And as you were saying, the what's coming out of like the US and some places in Europe, I heard that you ask sort of the average US citizen, and they think if you get COVID, you have a 50% chance of going into the hospital. I believe that's more on the left-leaning spectrum, but that's quite shocking when you look at the actual numbers of what your risk is of going into the hospital, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree. Well, one of the other pieces I've written for my Substack that people can read is basically asking the question: Does watching TV actually make you stupider and stupider? And what was interesting was that study you're talking about showed that Democrats in the U.S. overestimated the risk of COVID extremely, but even Republicans overestimated it very significantly. So even right across the political spectrum, it seems like if you were a human being taking in normal media in 2020, 2021, you were going to overestimate the risk of COVID. And that was influenced somewhat by your political beliefs, but everybody did it.
What is the actual risk of being hospitalized with COVID?
Well, I don't know.
It changes throughout ages, but
yeah, that's right. So I'll tell you guys, that's an interesting time to ask me that question, because I have COVID. I just tested positive this morning. I got a sore throat and sniffles last night, and I had to call in sick for work, and my test is positive. So, and my mother-in-law, who's 87, has a bad heart and bad lungs, is actually hospitalized with COVID in Moncton, despite being triple vaccinated. She's hospitalized with COVID. So the answer is it's extremely unlikely in young, healthy people. So if you don't have pre-existing problems, if you're not elderly and unwell to begin with, or elderly, I shouldn't say unwell, but elderly and comorbid, like you have other health problems, your risk is very, very low. Even at the peak danger of COVID, the number was probably somewhere from 1 to 3%. It's hard to put a firm number on, because we don't actually know how many people get COVID, because many of them are asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic, and they get sniffles for a day and they think, oh, that couldn't be COVID because COVID would nearly kill me. So I'm not sick enough to have COVID. There's this difference between what we call the infection fatality rates and the case fatality rates. So a case fatality rate is anybody who's been confirmed to have COVID. An infection fatality rate is anybody who actually had COVID, even the ones we didn't find, and that has to be estimated. So that 1 to 3%, like I say, that was back during the Delta strain. So it meant that probably, up to about 99% of people didn't get hospitalized. And it was probably higher than that. Like it was probably even less than that got hospitalized because we didn't know about certain percentage of people who were getting COVID and just getting better on their own.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, but that just shows, like, look at how much.
Okay, so backing it up.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Brandon.
Oh, sorry, I cut you off there. I was just gonna say, backing it up a little bit, about the person who's triple boosted. Do you think, considering that as well, do you think it makes sense to have COVID-19 vaccine mandates? Like, what would the vaccine need to do in order to justify a vaccine mandate? Maybe.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So as soon as you say vaccine mandate, it brings in all these other issues, right? So there's not many things that we mandate in our society, right? We try to mandate as few things as possible. So for instance, when you drive in Canada, you're mandated to drive on the right side of the road. You can't just start driving on the left side of the road because that would be very, very bad. And you'd be a huge risk to other people, right? The idea of mandating vaccines is really, really difficult because the risk that you pose to somebody else is extremely low, right? It's extremely, extremely low. Number one, because COVID is pretty benign for the vast majority of us, so the risk is low to them, low to us in that way. The risk of you, and it's different if you're sick, right? So right now I'm stuffy and my voice is sounding more and more like the Fry guy in The Simpsons. So I'm not going to go out around people. So it's different when you're sick. But if you're well and asymptomatic, the odds of you passing on COVID are really, really, really low. So you have this really low odds of passing it on, plus really low odds of a person getting sick. And you add that all up and you say, what is your actual risk to another person in society? And the answer is, it's super, super low. So if we're going to start mandating COVID vaccines, I don't see how, on the one hand, somebody from public health could justify mandating COVID vaccines and not mandate enforcement of no smoking policies. Like, hey, quit the hell smoking. We're going to be coming by your house. If we find you with cigarettes, we're going to lock you in solitary confinement. Because, like I say, in this whole time in Nova Scotia, we've had maximum about 1 in 35 people in hospital with COVID. The number of people in hospital at any given time from alcohol, drug, cigarette related illnesses are way higher. So if it's really about, oh, well, we need to protect the healthcare system and we need to do this, we need to do that, like, just doesn't fit to me to mandate something that's actually quite a low risk to anyone else, just to talk a little more on that. Canada has this act called the Quarantine Act, which actually came into existence in 1872 and was updated, I believe, in the 1980s, although I could be wrong there. The idea with the Quarantine Act, it gave a large degree of power to the medical officers of health. But the idea back then was, like, you had a ship that arrived full of immigrants from Ireland, and it turned out halfway across, a bunch of them got smallpox, and everybody was sick with smallpox, and they arrived in port in, say, Halifax. And you didn't want all these people with smallpox getting off and coming into your community and getting everybody sick, because smallpox killed 30 to 50% of the people who got it. And if you just let them walk into town, well, guess what? It's going to be a disaster. So the medical officer of health was given the power to quarantine sick people who were potentially high risk to others. So he/she could never quarantine somebody with a cold, but a boat full of smallpox people, yes. That was the idea with the Quarantine Act. There were some edge cases with people like these, there's these stories that you've read about guys with HIV who were going and having unprotected sex and not telling their partners that they had HIV. So, well, where's the medical officer's power there? Those are difficult ones. But to me, when you come around to COVID, there's no question, like to suddenly give the medical officer of health this extreme amount of power over everybody's life. So not somebody with COVID, not somebody who's actually sick with COVID, but everybody. You can, hey, medical officer of health, here's the keys to the province, and you can run it like you want. You can tell everybody to do anything that you want. Doesn't matter how stupid it is, because you are the medical officer of health and you now have supreme power. And you notice these politicians would duck any criticism by saying, well, it's not me, it's the medical officer of health. And then the medical officer of health would duck it the opposite way and say, oh, well, it's not me, it's a political decision. So they end up, pointing at each other. And we can't hold anybody to account. It's just a terrible situation, which the Quarantine Act, I've read bits of the Quarantine Act. It was never meant to allow the medical officer of health to lock us all in our homes. It was never meant for that.
Lock healthy people up. It's absolutely ridiculous, unprecedented.
Healthy, low risk people, right? Like really, you're talking people who are, you get a healthy kid, their risk of dying of COVID might be 1 in millions. For a healthy young child or even a healthy young adult, it's very, very low.
Yeah, virtually zero. So on the topic of adverse reactions, so we've interviewed a number of people with adverse reactions. And what I've noticed is when we ask about the reporting system, they've said it's not been mentioned to me. Reporting my case hasn't been mentioned. I can't seem to be able to do that. So everyone we've interviewed so far hasn't reported their adverse reaction. Can you explain the adverse reporting system in Canada and how that works, how the adverse reactions are reported and the process?
Yeah. I will. I'm just trying to think where to start. So I'll start with, so when a drug is being studied, the way that they determine side effects or unwanted effects of drugs is this very careful process. So you have people in a study, and for instance, I was involved with a study years ago of a new allergy drug, and they would bring people into these rooms and purposely put ragweed pollen into the air, and then some people would be taking placebo, some people would be taking the drug. None of us knew who was who, but everybody would write down their symptoms, right? So if you got a scratchy throat, you write down, I got a scratchy throat. If your nose stuffed up, you write down stuffed up nose. If you had nausea and vomiting, you write down, oh, I had nausea and I went to the bathroom and vomited. All of that would get recorded. And then if you picture that study would go on for whatever number of months, and then at the end of it all, you'd have all this data. And only at the end, the blinding comes off, and you can say, oh, look at that. People who actually took the real drug, it turns out they were getting nausea and vomiting more. So this drug, 8% of the people who took the drug got nausea and vomiting. Only 1% who took the placebo got nausea and vomiting. So therefore, that was a significant side effect. But what that requires is extremely diligent reporting of all symptoms. Right? If you didn't write down all those things, you'd never know. So when we essentially pushed out these vaccines into what was a big public trial of this vaccine, I had assumed that we would have a very careful reporting system that would be easy to use, that would be well announced, that would be not too time consuming for docs because we're always busy, and that if we got somebody in who was 4 days after a vaccine and they had some horrible swollen joint, that we could make a little report and it would get sent to public health and they would take care of it. And as the head of Emerge at the time, I joked that, if they change the brand to toilet paper, I got a memo about that. So I was expecting a memo about adverse event reporting, but it never came, it never came, it never came. We never got one. We never got any instruction on it. So when we started to see some things that we were worried about, docs had to dig and dig and dig and try to find these reporting forms. And then it turns out that they're very, very lengthy. They're like 4 pages of detailed, exactly what time did this happen? What was the batch number of the vaccine the person got? I don't know. They went to the pharmacy and they got a vaccine on Tuesday. They don't even know if it was Moderna or Pfizer, let alone the batch number. So they'd be asking me for all this data that I couldn't give. It was extremely time consuming, minimum of say 20 to 30 minutes if the doc wanted to do it properly. And so in my experience, doctors and nurses didn't do it. They just kind of brush things off. And even doctors who are fairly motivated to report, and I'd include myself, didn't report everything. It was just too hard. So what we have is big mess. There's a lot of people out there who clearly did have vaccine side effects that are not reported as such.
So crazy. Maybe to back it up a little bit, there's been this massive hysteria that we just talked about around COVID. New virus, we don't know much about it. And then we started to get more information about it. And then so we realized the true risk that older people with comorbidities are at significantly higher risk versus younger people who don't have any. But this is also a novel vaccine platform. We've never introduced sort of this gene therapy based mRNA vaccine. It's never been in human trials before. And that's a complete unknown too. But there's been this lack of safety concern almost, or sort of just like, oh no, it's safe. Don't even bother looking into it. Why do you think this is the case? Like, why would we not be putting it under the microscope?
I think once politicians and public health went in on vaccines, they went all in, right? I think part of it was how everything synced up with the election cycle in the US, Trump versus Biden, right versus left. I think that was part of it. I think there was so much pressure on governments and public health to fix the problem. Everybody felt we're in this world where we think science can fix everything. Science can make our lives good, right? It's called scientism. We think that science is this new deity that we pray to, save us, great science, right? And so when vaccines came out, they were put up on a pedestal right away. And even as we first started to vaccinate people, there were all of these glowing, over-the-top laudatory articles out about how wonderful vaccines were, and they were going to save us, they were going to end the pandemic, and blah, 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 blah. And once the media and public health and politicians had made that bed there, they had to lie in it. And it's really, really hard for them to back up in any way and say, oh, gee, sorry, it turns out that young males are more at risk from myocarditis and they probably shouldn't have vaccinated. Oh, sorry, it turns out that kids under 15 are definitely more at risk from the vaccine than any benefit they'll get, so they shouldn't be vaccinated. It would be really hard for them to do that, because at once they've kind of lauded the benefits of the vaccines and pushed them on everyone, boy, they look bad if they ever say anything different. So I think they're just too far down that road. And from kind of a psychological point of view, there's this great saying, I think it was, no, I'm going to forget who said it, but they said it is easier to fool a man than to have him accept that he was fooled, right?
Yeah. And
I think that's very true. We get very, very attached to our ideas, and once we have decided something, we've said something, we've posted our vaccine selfie on our Twitter bio and whatever, man, it's hard after that to back up and then say, oh, geez, sorry, you guys had a point there. These aren't as great as I thought. Humans just don't tend to do that.
Absolutely.
It seems to be a lot of face saving going on, at least at the level of politicians.
Yes, I think politicians now are trying to, they blow with the political winds, and a lot of them now a number of them are trying to talk about how, oh yeah, no, I never forced anybody to do it, like it was a voluntary choice and all that. I laugh at that. The best analogy I've heard of that is it would be sort of like Harvey Weinstein saying, I never forced anyone to sleep with me. It was just like, if you want your job, you can sleep with me, but I didn't force them. That's not forcing them, right? Like, exactly. And it's the same thing with the vaccines. It's very analogous, right? Like, oh, we're not forcing anybody. It's a free choice. But if you don't get it, you can't travel, you can't visit your sick relatives in the hospital, you can't go to a gym, you can't go to a restaurant, you can't work, you don't get unemployment insurance, but we're not forcing you. You do what you want. You do what you think is best, right?
You refer to those as privileges. They're like, those are just privileges. And again, kind of goes back to treating us like children. Well, if you're not going to behave, we're taking away your privileges. There's consequences for your actions. It's like, that is total coercion, and you're forcing. It's, definitely forcing people.
Have you had any personal experiences with like vaccine adverse events, or sort of like what other doctors have seen going on? Do you have any personal experiences on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you just a few things that, and I always have to be careful with how I tell these stories because I don't want to violate any patient confidentiality. But I've personally seen myocarditis in a young man who it was clearly vaccine-induced myocarditis. It started within 24 hours of him being vaccinated, and he was quite severe. He ended up a number of days in hospital and 2 months off work, and he wasn't allowed to even walk up a flight of stairs, et cetera, et cetera. So the media will say, oh, it's mild, but myocarditis is just mild, it's just mild, it's just mild. Well, this guy missed 2 months of work and he felt awful for a long time. And from my understanding of myocarditis and from the research that predates COVID on myocarditis, heart tissue is like brain tissue. You don't grow, you have a set number of cells in your brain and your heart, you don't grow one. So when you damage them and some die off, your heart does its best to make up for that, but it's never quite the same again, right? So it looks like these people with myocarditis probably have a higher risk of several things in the future, including what we call SCD or sudden cardiac death. They are more prone to rhythm abnormalities and that. So we don't know, but if you get thousands and thousands and thousands of people in Canada, US who have myocarditis, 5 years from now, one of them could be playing hockey and drop dead, right? Was that the myocarditis? Probably. How will we know that? It'll be tough. So that's one little kind of particular thing. Another episode which I think is very instructive. We fairly early on, so this would be back in maybe June of 2021 or so, when we were at the height of our vaccination program in Nova Scotia. There was a lady who came in. And to make a long story short, she had multiple blood clots and ended up dying. She was about 6 days after her second vaccine. Now, that could be coincidence because people die of blood clots on a regular basis. As emerge docs, long before there were COVID vaccines, we see people who come in with blood clots and die. So I can't say it was from the vaccine. You could get your vaccination, walk outside and get hit in the head by a meteorite and die, right? It wasn't the vaccination that did that. So we have to be really careful in interpreting these things. Just because they're temporally associated does not mean that they're causally linked. But it sure makes you wonder. And when you see 1 case of that, 2 cases of that, 5 cases of that, right? After a while, as docs, we should be saying, I think there's something here. And I have seen a number of things now that make me think that there is some kind of a blood clotting issue caused by mRNA vaccines. And it may be in a small percentage of people, but when you're vaccinating the entire world, a small percentage of people is quite a lot of people. So the question to me, because we're beyond properly reporting these, that didn't happen, not going to happen, and we won't find data that way. But what will tell the tale is when a year or two from now, when some smart person has taken all the data and put it together, was the rate of blood clots 10% higher in 2021 when we were vaccinating everybody? Was the rate of heart attacks 7% higher? Was the rate of was the rate of myocarditis related death 3% higher? That will come out eventually, maybe, if somebody's interested enough to fund and do that research. That might eventually come out.
Yeah, and I mean, you're not even really allowed to question the vaccines right now. A lot of things are being censored. I mean, our YouTube videos, we had Dr. Stephen Pellick, a PhD professor at UBC, his videos are taken down. You question the vaccine and you're censored, really. And we're seeing this a lot in Canadian politics, sort of the censorship of free speech and whatnot. Are we seeing this as well in medicine? Is freedom of speech in medicine politics being compromised during this time?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it's been a huge issue. So people can actually Google me. If they Google my name, Chris Milburn, and the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, they'll find that I was actually I've actually had difficulties over free speech issues since before COVID was ever here. I'm an outspoken guy. I say what I think, so I get myself into trouble over things like trans issues, et cetera, which are, you know, you're not really, as a doctor, you're not really supposed to say anything that might contravene the narrative, right? So free speech in medicine this was a problem, and free speech in society in general. This was already a problem that's been developing. I'd say you guys are young, but it was called, now we call it wokeness, right? But back in the 80s and 90s, we just called it political correctness. And there was this more and more extreme political correctness coming on. Like, so for instance, there could be you could be very, very positive towards gay rights and gay marriage and whatnot. But if you said anything like, I don't think two men up on a float with assless chaps grinding against each other going down the middle of the street is really a great thing. And I actually have gay friends who say that, because, you know what I mean? But that's the kind of thing that could get you into trouble to say, and people would automatically, oh, you're anti-gay and you're a bigot and blah, blah, blah. And that kind of censorship towards free speech has been kind of evolving over the years, and there's more and more and more issues that are falling into that realm of you're only allowed to have one opinion, right? And so I guess we shouldn't be totally surprised that happened in COVID, because it was happening with trans issues, native issues, LGBT issues, global warming issues, you name it, especially if you're in certain professions that tend to be more, let's say, more left-wing on average. Having the wrong opinion will certainly limit your career opportunities, if not get you expelled. And so, you know, COVID hit, and we're just seeing I think it's a manifestation of the same thing. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I was noticing that prior to the pandemic hitting, especially the 2 to 3 years prior, it was really starting to ramp up, the censorship and people responding emotionally. If you know, even asked a question about, say, trans issues or something like that, like should trans women be going into women's washrooms or something like that, or change rooms, is that okay? There's a lot of an emotional response to that. And we see that almost with definitely see that with the COVID and vaccine response. You know, you question the vaccine and people immediately have this heightened emotional response. And it goes back to, as you're saying, kind of like a religious reaction rather than really wanting to be scientific and breaking it down, looking at the argument and taking emotion out of it. That's especially important in the medical field, to be able to have civil discourse and debates, scientific debates. We're gonna really lose if we don't get that back.
Yes, I agree completely. There's a great saying by Richard Feynman, was a very famous Nobel-winning physicist back in the 60s, I believe, and he was a famous teacher. And he once said that science, and I'm going to get the exact word wrong, but he said science is the belief in the fallibility of experts, right? So when you think about that, it's just a sentence, but when you actually think about it, it's very profound. What it means is that by definition, science is not about one person coming in, whether it's Dr. Fauci or Dr. Strang in my province or Theresa Tam, and saying this is the way things are. That's not science. So by definition, Michael Crichton, who was actually a brilliant man, I'm trying to remember, he had a few series on TV and whatnot, but he was a medical doctor, a very bright man. He wrote a piece on the importance of dissent in science, and he said, if it's consensus, it's not science, and if it's science, it's not consensus, right? And that's particularly true with new and evolving issues. It's one thing to say, I would totally agree if somebody said, well, we do have scientific consensus, like smoking causes lung cancer. Well, yeah, it does. Yeah, you know, we have 50, 60, 70 years of research. Or things like the polio vaccine seems to work really well. Yeah, again, we have decades and decades of research, and I think the polio vaccine is this wonderful sterilizing vaccine that's done a lot for our world. But to kind of, in the first couple of months of the COVID pandemic, the first month was, as I say, wasn't too bad. But then immediately, like, we got these things like mask mandates. And I'm doing a big review of masks on my Substack, and I can't find real data to support mask mandates. And yet it became, like you say, it became an emotional and almost religious thing. Like you were a horrible person if you wouldn't just wear a mask everywhere. If you at all fought it, it was just like, oh, he's a crazy alt-right Trump supporting Nazi, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
rather,
exactly.
rather than rather than to say, oh, maybe this guy with a PhD in biophysics or whatever, might know something that I don't. It just became a religious thing, and mask mandates, lockdowns, school closures, vaccines, they all went the same route rather than to discuss them rationally and talk about the science. It was just religion.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not too sure if you've heard about Dr. Byron Brittle, but he actually asked Theresa Tam for a debate regarding the safety of the vaccines, and then he was met with no answer. But so my question is, do you think the public will ever get sort of that debate where sort of opposing views are able to debate on a topic like vaccine safety or mask mandates? Do you think we'll ever be privy to that?
Pessimistically, I'd say no. I don't think so because science is so controlled and funded by big pharma. Between big pharma and government, there's almost no source of kind of independent funding. And good research does take a lot of time and a lot of money. So my feeling is that there's not much impetus out there for people to prove themselves wrong. And the same people who hold the purse strings to funding any research on these big issues that we're talking about, the last thing they want to do is to find out that, oops, the vaccines actually overall made things a little worse, right? Because of antigenic imprinting or something like that. That would be just anathema to them. So there's absolutely no push towards that. So I think if we do get the real story out on a number of these issues, it's going to come out in little bits and pieces, and it will be independent thinkers and independent think tanks with private funding that might get there. So I guess I have a little bit of hope that things like the Brownstone Institute and whatnot might push us in some good directions. But boy, it's going to be a tough go.
Yeah, going off that independent sources. So I think it's a portfolio manager from BlackRock. His name's Ed Dowd. He found an increase. I think it was like a 40 or 60% increase in deaths between those between 18 and 64 that were non-COVID related deaths using CDC's own data. And so he's just putting it out there. Some people have replicated his data. And his hypothesis is that it's coming from the vaccine, but he's saying, I just want to start the conversation. If it's something else, challenge me on this, but no one sort of even talked to him back about that. It's been met with silence.
Well, that brings up something that I think is worth people thinking about. It's interesting, when I talk to docs, most docs that I know are kind of 100% tied to the narrative, capital T capital, and they believe the vaccines are wonderful, and and all these policies are great and whatnot. The problem from an individual doctor's point of view, so like the type of people who get really sick or die from COVID are very particular. They tend to be elderly. They tend to be obese, diabetic, and comorbid, right? And they're very obvious to us. You get somebody like my mother-in-law I mentioned is in the hospital currently. So you got an 87-year-old with COVID who's now hospitalized, and she's right there in front of you, and she's testing positive for COVID, and she has the symptoms. So as a doctor, it's like, boom, there's a COVID patient, and that's big in your brain. And you see, you're in a big hospital, you might have 40 COVID patients admitted. Now your hospital might serve hundreds of thousands of people, but still you got 40 COVID patients sitting in front of you. So that is a big thing. On the other side of the coin, like when you look at, there were all, probably 95% of the population is low risk, right, for COVID. And we vaccinated all of them too. And so the problem we get into is in any given year, like I've seen 32-year-old guys drop dead of a heart attack, right? In my time in the ER. It's rare, but every once in a while it happens. And because it's rare, statistically, it jumps around, right? So I might go 1 year working in a big emerge, and I might see 3 guys under the age of 50 who die of heart attacks in 1 year. The next year it might be 4. The next year might be 1, right? Because that's just normal statistical flux when you're talking about low numbers. So the problem from the point of view, I can see as one doctor, I can see the COVID patients and they're obvious. But if I saw 5 patients under 50 who had heart attacks this year, I don't actually know, was some of them from being vaccinated? I have no way to know that. Maybe I would have only seen 2 this year if they weren't being vaccinated. But some years I might see 5, so I can't really say it was from vaccination. And what we need to know is, did every emerge doc see more than usual of that? And that we're not going to figure that out by people sitting around chatting about it like a bunch of docs in a room. You, to some extent, they can put things together, but really we need data. And so again, my point being, COVID patients, obvious, make big news, are there in doctor's brain. COVID vaccine side effects, maybe not so obvious, they blend into what we normally see, and we don't know what to make of those cases. So it's really tough thing to balance. Yeah.
And then just switching gears a little bit. So just going off the point, you can't really question any of these things. You need to wear your mask. You're a good person if you do so. You can't question the risk of COVID because you're doing it for your grandma or so-and-so. You can't question the safety of the vaccine because, again, you're doing it for someone else. So my question is, when the Prime Minister is giving the population sort of this rhetoric that you're a racist, you're a misogynistic, I think he said, if you oppose these vaccines, like, is this not just stirring up hate in the public? Like, is this not just making things worse? Like, would a debate not solve this issue? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I just think he was so funny. I think, again, I keep mentioning it, but I wrote about this on my Substack. It's called "When Your Prime Minister Jumps the Shark." I don't know if you guys know that expression, but basically, when you jump the shark, you've gone into la la land. And nobody can take you seriously anymore. And I think when he started to talk about racists and misogynists and all that, it's like, okay, wait a minute. How did you get there? Because a lot of the people, because of my outspokenness, I've been contacted by a lot of people who have, I would say, extreme negative views of the vaccine, like much more extremely negative than I am. I'm kind of neutral, but I can't say there was one person who ever contacted me who was racist or misogynist or homophobic or anything. A lot of them were women. A lot of them are visible minorities. A lot of them are LGBT. So it was kind of funny to me. I think what happened was like he just had to pick up some type of weapon to bludgeon people on the other side of this whole debate in society. And the best weapon these days is the racist, misogynist, transphobe, homophobe, blah blah blah, all the phobes and ists. It's a great weapon because everybody's so attuned to it, right? Like if you don't have a Black Lives Matter sign on your lawn, you're probably not anti-racist enough. There's something wrong with you. Everybody is so tuned and so freaked out by that threat of being called misogynist or racist or whatever, that they will run in the other direction when they hear that applied to any group. So I think he knew what he was doing. It was very cold and calculated. I haven't figured out with Trudeau whether he's evil or stupid. I think there's some of both with him, but I can't actually tell because everything he reads is prepared. He learned a few years ago not to go off the cuff. He was much worse than Trump when he did that. So.
Yeah, it's just wild to see. It's really the labeling someone with some sort of trigger word so that you don't hear their views and opinions. Because if you're listening to a racist, you're associating with a racist, and you're almost racist yourself for having listened to them. So yeah, I've experienced even before the pandemic if I'm questioning anything, like even saying, hey, well, maybe Trump's policy here isn't so bad. Let's talk about this one for a bit. People go, oh, no, 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 he's racist. So if you even support any policy he has, you must be racist. So it really is a very smart tactic. When you break it down, think about it, it's like it doesn't really make sense that people who don't want a vaccine are misogynistic, especially when a lot of them are women too. But people don't really think that through, seemingly, which is disappointing. But it's a smart tactic, and it's been working these past couple of years.
It sure is. And back to, I think, Brandon's original question, whatnot. What I think it allows is it completely sidesteps the need to actually talk about the issues.
Yeah.
That's so in that way, it's very clever politically. It's like, ooh, I don't really want to get into this whole vaccine thing because A, we vaccinated everybody, we're having our worst COVID outbreak yet. So obviously it didn't do what we said, and we might get our feet held to the fire on that one. So I better just break up the I look at it as you have those things on the wall in case of emergency break glass, and it's in case of emergency break glass, and Trudeau picks it up and it's the racist bat, I'll
Yeah.
with the racist bat.
Exactly. But then it keeps people from listening to the other perspective. So like you even look at the Joe Rogan podcast, he had Malone and McCullough on. And rather than saying, they called them conspiracy theorists, and rather than just leaving it at that, it was like, we have to take it down. You can't even listen to these people. Because if you listen to them, you might agree with them, and we can't have that. Which is just a terrible state to be in right now. But you have a free speech in medicine conference that it takes place in October. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that, who the speakers are, who can attend?
Yeah, so we are in the midst of setting this up, and so we have freespeechinmedicine.com set up with a kind of preliminary website on it, a bare bones website. And people have to forgive me when they go to it. They have to realize, number one, I'm old and not very techy, and number two, I'm trying to do it myself in the midst of my regular work. But we already have a couple of speakers committed, and I guess I don't want to put names out yet, but what I will say is, if you've been following these issues in Canada, you will know the names. They're some very big names, and even internationally, some big names. So it's at the end of October in Nova Scotia. Our target audience is actually docs and other healthcare workers. So we're kind of going after, I shouldn't say going after, but our target demographic for the types of talks that we see being given is for physicians. But I think once the first round of signups is done, if we still have empty spots, we'd be kind of offering them up to whoever wants to come, because I think it would probably be of general interest as well. And it is in Cape Breton in the fall, which is quite beautiful, so worth coming just for that reason. If you've never seen the Cabot Trail, it's very nice.
Awesome.
Yeah, hopefully all goes well. There's not a resurgence of COVID or anything like that to interrupt. Lee, go ahead.
Well, we'll definitely have to link in the video so viewers can find it. We'll have a link to the website. We'll also have a link to your Substack, and any other links you want to share. Just send us an email after. We'll get them all posted there so people can click on those. But just to be mindful of your time as well, and to wrap up, how we like to close these usually is to ask the person we're interviewing to give either a piece of advice or a message to our audience. Who primarily are students and professors, but we have a lot of, concerned citizens and people from all over the world. So if you have any sort of message for these people, what would that be?
Here'd be my message. I can't remember who said it. It'll sound like I'm very wise, but I'm never very wise. It's people who are wise. But don't be silent. Silence always favors the oppressor and not the oppressed, So I think there's a lot of people out there who they might be vaccinated themselves. They might be okay with lockdown themselves because they got a job that they can do from home. But they feel that somehow wrong, the policies are wrong, but they haven't wanted to say anything because it might make somebody mad. Maybe their wife would be grumpy with them, or their cousin who's a real Trudeau fan would, unfriend them on Facebook and whatever. So they've stayed silent. I really do think that there's so many people out there who are concerned about not just the COVID issue, but again, broadening it out to all these political correctness issues that have started to plague society. We now, like, we have a trans swimmer who's he's setting all the records and beating
Leah
Olympic.
Thomas.
Yeah, Leah Thomas is, and you know, my wife and I were very, we run a swim team. This is a real concern of ours. And we've always worked, when I've organized, I've been the head of a running club, and I've always tried to be equal for male and female whenever we do anything, because I think it's important. And I look at this and I just think, why isn't anybody saying anything? There's almost nobody who would think this is right. It only happens because we're quiet. And as long as we're quiet, we're going to see more terrible things happen in the world. So we need to be brave. We need to speak up.
Absolutely. And really, it can be scary, especially with the social pressure and younger people being scared of that, people being scared of losing their jobs. But when you stand up and speak truth, I find good things come from that. It's scary because you don't know what's on the other side of that, but people are wanting truth to be spoken, and those people are going to come to you once you do. And you may lose people, but you'll find people as a result as well. But these things need to be said. We need to start standing up. I mean, you don't see enough feminists standing up for the female swimmers with the Leah Thomas situation, right? These women have worked very hard and for very long, trained for a long time to compete, and they're being beat. All the records are being beaten by Leah Thomas, who was technically in when they competed in a male dominated swimming competition, they were only an average competitor. So we need to just talk about these without emotion in it and debate it and discuss what's the best solution. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think that's a great closing message. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Chris, for coming and talking with us. It was our pleasure.
Listen, thank you guys very much. Thanks for having me. And I'd say, sorry, I'm a little bit croaky, but hopefully I'll survive this COVID thing.
Anyways, thank you so much for joining us.
Cool.
I'll talk to you
Thanks,
soon.
guys. Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.